Italy. A cold night, a student apartment, a closed door no one wants to open, a nervous phone call, and within hours, not only does a crime appear, a character appears. Because what happened next was not just an investigation. It became a global reality show with judges, cameras, headlines, and a paradox that, legally, is still alive. On January 23rd, 2025, Italy's highest court upholds a conviction against Amanda Knox for slander. She herself had already been definitively exonerated of the murder of her roommate on March 27th, 2015. Acquitted of the main crime, Amanda was convicted over one piece of the puzzle born from that same crime. Why did the world keep feeling that nothing was closed, even when, on paper, it was? This story is not resolved by a verdict. It is resolved by a mechanism, by a detail, and by an uncomfortable question. What happens when judicial truth and media truth do not just collide, but compete to keep your memory? In less than a minute, you're going to understand why this is not just another case. We are talking about almost 2 decades of twists and turns, with convictions, acquittals, reversals, reconvictions, and one final legal branch that refused to die. Italy does not work like a courtroom movie where the gavel comes down and everything ends. Here, there are levels, appeals, and a Supreme Court that does not retry the crime itself, but the logic of the process, which ends up becoming fuel. Because this case runs on 3 engines. 1. A disputed piece of forensic evidence, fragile, controversial, easy to explain on television, and hard to uphold without doubts in a courtroom. 2. A clash of narratives, the prosecution building a story, the defense trying to dismantle it, and the public choosing whichever version feels more cinematic. And 3. An appeals structure that allows a verdict to be not the ending, but the beginning of a new chapter. But the 4th engine, the one that will haunt you through this entire video, is born in one specific early morning, the interrogation of November 6th, 2007. It was not a fingerprint. It was not DNA. It was not a video. It was a name, Patrick Lumumba. And that name, written on a piece of paper by Amanda Knox in the middle of pressure, exhaustion, and questionable translations, creates a legal branch that will survive even when the murder case collapses at the final level. To understand why this story is so addictive and so toxic at the same time, we first have to understand the world where it takes place. Italy. The criminal process moves through stages. First instance, trial and sentence, appeal, a full review, with the power to change everything completely. And then Cassazione, the highest court, looking at the case through a different lens. It does not just ask what happened, but whether what the lower courts did was coherent, logical, defensible. That is what starts an emotional machine in motion. Each level does not just review evidence, it also rewrites the official narrative in documents almost no one reads, but which decide everything. Let's go back to the beginning. November 2nd, 2007. The crime is discovered. Meredith Kercher, a British student, is found dead in a student residence in Perugia, a residence she shared, among others, with Amanda Knox. In a case like this, the normal thing would be for the focus to lock onto the strongest evidence, the clearest perpetrator, the most direct line. But this case does the opposite. Within hours, the world was already looking for a villain because the coverage did not wait for justice. The coverage got ahead of justice. Front pages, headlines, television. And suddenly, an American student is given a nickname, Foxy Knoxy. That is not a minor detail. It is a narrative weapon. Because once you give someone a nickname, they stop being a person. They become a role. And the role comes with a script. November 6th, 2007. Police station, early morning, exhaustion, pressure, translations under suspicion. This is the moment when, according to the case file, Patrick Lumumba's name appears as the supposed culprit. The exact moment when the case splits in two. Branch A, the murder. Branch B, the accusation against Lumumba. Lumumba is arrested. He spends about 2 weeks in jail. His life is marked forever. And even though the accusation later collapses, the damage is already done. If you falsely accuse someone, even if it is later proven that they had nothing to do with the crime, the false accusation remains a crime in itself. The case stops being just one case. It becomes two, and they begin to separate, but never completely. 2009. The first major verdict. Amanda Knox and her then-boyfriend, Rafael Solicito, are convicted of murder. Decades in prison are on the line. Their global reputation is shattered, and a story that, for a moment, seems sealed. But then a crack appears. The star piece of evidence, the one that sells on television, the one that sounds definitive when you hear it in a headline, starts having problems when you look at it again with time. And this is where one of the simplest, most visual, most devastating details for anyone who is not a forensic expert comes in. A bra clasp. A piece collected 46 days later. 46. You do not need a doctorate to understand the question that raises. What happened to that scene during those 46 days? Who went in? Who touched it? What moved? What got contaminated? And just when people think the case is out of air, the case starts breathing again. Appeal. And suddenly, acquittal. Amanda Knox walks free. She returns to the United States. The public splits into two camps, and neither side listens to the other. And this is where the Italian system turns into a perfect narrative labyrinth, because it is not only decided whether someone is guilty, but also how trustworthy the road was that led to that conclusion. So the case will not let you celebrate. Cassazione overturns the acquittal and orders a retrial. It is the kind of twist that, if you wrote it into a script, they would tell you it is too much, that no one would believe it. But it happens, and what comes next is one of the most brutal fears anyone who has ever lived through a legal process has felt. The idea that the final word still does not exist. New trial, new murder conviction, again. And once more, the case feels like an elevator with no brakes. Up, down, up, down. And each movement rips away a different piece of you. We arrive at 2015, March 27th. Cassazione definitively overturns the murder convictions of Knox and Solicito. End of chapter. But the world did not feel it was final, because the case was no longer in the courts. It was in the culture, in the nicknames, in the front pages, in the myth. And also because even though the murder case was closed for them, the other branch was still alive. The slander tied to Patrick Lumumba's name. Even though, in the end, the only person convicted of the murder was Rudy Guid. But the camera did not fall in love with him. The camera fell in love with the more marketable character. And when a case turns into a product, the product does not always follow judicial logic. It follows the logic of ratings. Cassazione closes the murder case in 2015. That means that for Knox and Solicito, Italy no longer considers them guilty of that crime. Period. But slander is something else. What was said or asserted in that 2007 interrogation is a separate offense, and it can continue on its own legal path, even if the murder case is already buried. So the case is left like a ghost with two faces. The murder that officially falls apart. The false accusation that remains as a legal stain. The European Court of Human Rights concludes that there were rights violations during the interrogation stage. Issues such as legal assistance and the role of the interpreter. This matters for two reasons. Because it reminds you that the case is not only about who did it, but about how a version of what happened was built. And because people think a human rights ruling automatically erases a conviction, and that is not how it works. It can open doors. It can justify a new trial. It can require a review. But it does not guarantee the ending everyone wants, and that is where the seed of the final chapter begins to grow. Italy orders a new trial on the slander charge, not for the murder, but for the accusation against Lumumba. You can win the main war and still keep fighting the epilogue. Florence, new verdict, reconvicted of slander. And now imagine the psychological impact. You have spent years feeling that the case is closed, that you were exonerated, that the whole case was a media disaster. And still a court tells you that that signature, that name, that moment in 2007 remains your criminal responsibility. January 23rd, 2025. Cassazione upholds the slander conviction. The last front in Italy is closed. In practical terms, the sentence may already have been served, but the conviction remains. And here, the central paradox becomes legal reality. Innocent of murder, with an active conviction born from the same case file. First came the crime, the public pressure, the human need for a quick story. Second, an investigation with forensic pieces that become symbols, a bra clasp, a knife, low-level DNA, arguments about contamination, complex things that, on television, get simplified into one sentence. Third, the media character, a nickname, a sexualized narrative, a cultural clash, and the trial begins before the trial begins. Fourth, the levels of appeal that allow, twist the public reads as incoherent, when in fact they are following a different logic: reevaluate, overturn, repeat, correct, or make things worse. And fifth, the tiny detail that changes everything. Patrick Lumumba's name signed in the middle of the night. That is the detail that survives, because in the end, the murder turned into a battle over evidence and procedural logic. But the slander turned into a battle over responsibility for a specific accusation, with specific harm to a specific person. Amanda Knox exonerated of murder on paper. But every time the case becomes news again, the nickname comes back. The character comes back. The reality show comes back. And on the other side, Patrick Lumumba, a man who was jailed over an accusation that was not true, dragged into a story that was not even about him. But he was forced to become part of it, and caught among these threads, Meredith Kercher's family, trapped in the worst kind of hell, a grief turned into spectacle, where every judicial twist feels like reopening a wound that never heals. Reality leaves us with an idea that is, at the very least, uncomfortable. Judicial truth does not always kill the myth. You can have a definitive closure in 2015 and still live in a society where people feel the case was never closed, because what was closed was the file, not the character. How a debatable piece can be presented as decisive, and how time, expert analysis, and reviews can turn media certainty into legal doubt. How a foreign woman can be read as a symbol, and how that reading gets exported to headlines in different countries with different tones. How one early morning, one pressure-filled moment, one translation, one signature can create a branch that lasts 18 years. Because yes, for Italy, the murder ended for Knox and Solicito on March 27th, 2015. And yes, for Italy, the slander conviction was confirmed in 2025. But the case that lives inside people's heads, is not decided in Cassazione. Even when justice took years to correct itself, how many people had already decided their verdict from the very first headline? Or, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, support the channel by subscribing. That way, we can keep bringing you new mysteries. And tell me, is there a specific story you'd like us to tell for you? Sending you a hug.